Hello. If you remember from the last video, we left off on the Battle of Verdun between Germany and France. So now we're going to continue on talking about more people entering the war and also continuing more of the battles in World War I. So the next one, we call it the the Brusilov offensive. So when you read your resource guide about different wars and battles and you hear the offensive meaning like an attack, meaning somebody is going to attack somebody else. Like somebody was sitting pretty, doing nothing, and then somebody goes over there and attacks them. This particular one's called the Brusilov offensive, and just like it sounds with this Brusilov, it was a Russian attack, on Austria. So first of all, what happened is that there was a series of Allied losses. So we're talking about, remember we just talked about this one here in the Battle of Verdun. We talked about the one in the Battle of Gallipoli. So all of a sudden, the Allies have lost a little bit. And the thing about them losing is that Austria is now pretty... not sensitive, vulnerable. So General Brusilov of Russia said, okay, we're going to attack the Austrian army at Galicia. And he was very smart, very intelligent. He was one of the best generals that Russia had to offer. He used aerial photographs so we could see like what's going on. He supplied the enemy misinformation. He used what they call sapper trenches. A sapper trench is essentially a trench that is close to a fort or an enemy, and it goes kind of underneath the walls of the enemy, and the walls would like collapse. So they call that the sapper trench. And they also feigned attacks and hid reserves. So essentially they would have a light front and pretend to attack, but it wasn't everybody. And so, the other people would come and try to attack them, and then the reserves would come in later. They were hidden and attack that way. Because of this great, brilliant war mind, Brusilov, Austria loses, and they lose a lot. They lose almost 1 million people, 750,000 casualties. And also because Austria lost so much, Austria and Germany had to, again, take troops from other places and weaken themselves in other areas. So this was a very awesome attack for Russia. The next offensive, so that one was the Brusilov offensive. This one is called the Somme offensive, and this was not very good for the Allies. So this was in France, this place called Somme, the Somme River, and the Allies said, okay, let's attack. Again, it's an offensive. We're going to attack the German lines at the Somme River. They weren't very planned. They weren't very prepared for this, and the German strategy was something called defense in depth, which is very similar to the Brusilov offensive, where they had a very weak front, but then they had strong people behind them, and strong people behind them, and strong people behind them. So that's what they call defense in depth, and it led to failed attacks by the Allies. This was 4 months of bloody trench warfare. So we talked about trench warfare last time, how terrible it is, how nothing good comes out of trench warfare. And this is actually the first time they started to use tanks. So one question could be, when was the first time tanks were introduced into World War I? You could say the Somme offensive. What happened is that the tanks were not very strong. The armor wasn't very strong so even though people were firing at this tank, the tank still got killed or shot at. It didn't have a very strong armor. And also this area, it's hard to tell by this picture, but it was very muddy, very wet. So the tanks, it took forever, and it was very hard for them to move around. So the tanks were very ineffective. Tanks really didn't do much for anybody in World War I. At the end of this offensive, again, this was an offensive, which means the Allies went to attack Germany. Britain suffered 432,000 casualties. France suffered 194,000. Germany only 230,000. So Germany comes out looking okay after this offensive by the Allies. And here's some pictures that you could see. A soldier carries a casualty, things like that. So it was a charge towards the German trench that was futile, pointless, terrible. Okay, new party. So we talked about already the Ottoman Empire entering. We talked about Italy entering. Now let's talk about another country, Romania. Here's a picture of Romania where this red dot is, east of Austria-Hungary. So because of the Brusilov offensive, because Russia did so well and so awesome against Austria, Romania was like, maybe the Allies are going to win after all. And then the Allies, because Romania was kind of interested, they said like, oh, if you join us, we're going to give you, if you can see in this yellow area, we're going to give you some territory from Hungary if we win the World War. So Romania's like, okay, sounds good. August 27, 1916, now Romania declared war on Austria-Hungary. Now they're a part of it. Sounds good, right? Like, it's Romania. Like, what can go wrong? So, what ends up happening with Romania is, well, first of all, here's a picture of after Romania entered the war. So let's just have a quick count of what's going on. We've got Germany, we've got Austria-Hungary, we've got Turkey, and this is the Ottoman Empire. And we've got Russia, Italy, France, Britain, and even Portugal is a part of this also on the Allied powers. Central powers versus the Allied powers. So, what's up with Romania? So Romania, now we got another offensive. So we have the Brusilov offensive, the Somme offensive. Now we're talking about the Bulgarian offensive. In this Bulgarian offensive, Bulgaria declared war on Romania. And what happens is that the Central Powers, they invaded and defeated the Romanian forces. So even though Romania joined the Allies, it actually ended up being, it sounds weird, but them joining their team actually made them weaker. It's kind of like you get someone on your team and all of a sudden your team is worse because you got a new guy or whatever. So it hurt the Allies. First of all, the Russian front was expanded. So now that side on the east side of Russia, over here, now became even bigger or more susceptible to attack because Romania is a part of it. I think here's Romania right here. So now instead of being neutral, now they're part of Russia. Now they could, like, it's another piece that they could attack of the Allies. The Central Powers, once they took over Romania, they gained the resources from Romania. So Romania had pretty good supplies. They had some good technology. Now it was part of the Central Powers. And that piece of Romania actually gave and connected Germany, Austria-Hungary to the Ottoman Empire. So here's the Central Powers. And now that they took over Romania, now they have a bridge between all the Central Powers, which is very, very awesome for them. So Romania joining the war sounds good, but was not very good for the Allies. Now, Russia, talking about Russia, is starting to see some cracks in their armor, so to speak. So Russia, remember, big bad, great army coming from the east. They're having some issues internally. So first of all, the Tsar, Nicholas II, first of all, Russia was fighting a very costly war. So the economy was terrible. All these businesses and companies, these industries were now focused on making artillery, making bullets. So now, instead of making like bread or food for the regular people, those stuff got more expensive. They got more higher in demand. So things in Russia were more expensive, like food, all that stuff. So the economy was terrible, back home. So because things were going terrible and then because of the war, the Tsar, Nicholas II, decided to leave the Russian capital and he was going to join the front lines of this war. This made for a very unstable government. There was this empress, her name was Alexandra. She took charge. The only problem with Empress Alexandra is that she actually had some German bloodlines. So people didn't trust this lady because, remember, they're against Germany. Germany is their rival. All of a sudden they hire, or all of a sudden their leader is now German. And this lady, Empress Alexandra, hires someone called Rasputin to take charge. And the two of them are kind of in charge of Russia. Only problem is that they're both terrible at leading. So when they're leading, they put other people or not very great people in powerful positions just like they were. The Russian people were angry, they were upset, they definitely didn't like Rasputin, they definitely didn't like Alexandra, so they kind of rioted and they killed Rasputin. And the faith in the government and the faith of the people in winning the war, they thought they were going to win the war, all of a sudden they're not so sure anymore. Russia used to be, again, a big, bad, they just won that Brusilov offensive. Now all of a sudden things aren't working out so well in Russia. In March 1917, there was the abdication of the Tsar. So abdication means like to step down or to resign. So the Russian army, which was once fighting this war, now had to come back home and put down like these protests and these riots of the government. Because of this, mutiny started. Soldiers were forced to fire at civilians or people protesting, and then all of a sudden the army didn't like that. They're like, I don't want to fire at my people, or they want to fire into civilians who aren't armed. So all of a sudden these mutinies started where the army is like, oh no, I'm not going to listen to what the government tells me. Because of this uncertainty in the leadership, they demanded, they're like, hey, Tsar, hey, leader, I need you to, we want you to resign and step down. The Tsar did step down, and then eventually he was killed. So it's like, there you go. Because of this crazy government change, all of a sudden a new government was starting to form. It was once like a monarchy. It was now became a democracy, and it didn't last. Okay, so now you know what's going on in Russia. So here is, this is flashback to last season. Here's the Tsar and his family. So what happened in Russia had a big deal, made a big deal in what happened with the United States. So here we go. Now we're finally talking about the United States. So way later in the war, here comes the United States. Okay, the U.S. strongest economy, third strongest navy, only had 108,000 troops, not very big, but by the end of the war they'd get 1 million troops. The United States, and again, they're super far away from Europe, so no one has to worry about the United States of America being attacked or nobody has. They're far away and they can supply a whole bunch of stuff, and they're very powerful. So the whole time in the war, the United States and Woodrow Wilson, the president, just want to remain neutral. They don't want to be involved in it. It's super far away. They have nothing to do with it. But they were friends with Britain and France, so they had been supplying them with merchant fleet and large loans. Like, they were making a lot of money from this war just by supplying the Allies with supplies. So after a while, they realized that, okay, philosophically, the United States were great because they wanted to help Britain and France because they were right, and also Russia was starting to have a democracy. So the United States, publicly were saying we're joining the war because it's right. These are our friends, and we're trying to spread democracy around the world. But in the reality, the United States only joined. One of the main reasons they joined was because they wanted the Allies to win. Because if they won, then they could repay the loans to the United States. The United States in this war, Britain's like, I need money. I need money. I need money. And the United States is like, here you go. Here's some money, right? But the problem is that if they lost the war, the United States would never get any of that money back from the loans. The United States is like, okay, we need to protect our investment. We're going into the war. So there's that. So here's the American timeline. First of all, remember February 1, we have unrestricted submarine warfare. So normally in the rules of war, you're only allowed to fight, in the seas, other fighting ships. But there was unrestricted submarine warfare, and if you remember, they shot down 2 big ships that had Americans on it. One of them was the Lusitania, and that had 128 Americans on it. They also later on shot down a French boat which had Americans on it also. So all of a sudden there's this pressure from the public to get America into the war because, hey, they killed Germany killed our civilians. Like, what are you gonna do? One of the big things that got America into the war was something called the Zimmermann telegram. Let me explain the Zimmermann telegram. So Germany, wanting to pressure the United States, what happened was that they sent a telegram. They don't have email. They don't have a telephone. They sent a telegram to Mexico. And they told Mexico, hey, if you join us in the war, we'll give you pieces of the United States back. If you remember the history of the United States and Mexico, the United States basically took over a lot of the Mexican territory. Germany sent a telegram saying, hey, if you join us, you could have Arizona back, you'd have California back, and if we win, you could get the pieces from the United States that you lost. Only problem is that was supposed to be in secret, and the United States eventually found it, and it was published, and they saw that Germany was threatening them with a partnership with Mexico. A couple weeks later, we talked about this. So democracy kind of temporarily happens in Russia. In the same day, German submarines, these U-boats, they sink 3 U.S. merchant ships because they happen to be in the area. America has no choice. The United States has no choice. They finally declare war on Germany. And this was a photo to try to get more people to join the army against Germany. So this is the last slide. I just want to show you a quick video of the U.S. soldiers, the U.S. entering the war.
The Americans were raring to fight.
Crazy, for we gave a yell like a bunch of wild Indians and started down the hill running and cursing in the face of the machine gun fire. Men were falling on every side. But we kept going, yelling and firing as we went. We threw hand grenades as if they had been baseballs. A boy next to me threw a hand grenade and hit a tree. It bounced back and exploded. We saw it just in time to hit the bottom of the trench and keep from getting killed.
The Americans had a lot to learn, but their presence gave the Allies a huge morale boost.
They looked larger than ordinary men. Their tall, straight figures were in vivid contrast to our undersized armies of pale recruits. I pressed forward with the others to watch the United States physically entering the war. So godlike, so magnificent, so splendidly unimpaired in comparison with the tired, nerve-racked men of the British Army. So these were our deliverers at last. And with the knowledge that we were not, after all, defeated, found myself beginning to cry.
So this video is trying to give you just this basic picture of what happens when the U.S. enters the war. You can see they're kind of fun-loving. They're kind of not used to this war. They aren't grizzled yet. The Allies were happy because they were huge. They were big. They brought a lot of reserves that they needed to last this war. And you could tell they were kind of silly. They're throwing grenades like baseballs. They're jumping around on this cannon and joking around, hitting each other's hats. So just let you know like what it was like for the soldiers when the U.S. entered the World War. So that's it for this part of the video. Hope you enjoyed it, and then we'll continue on in the next video about how the war ended. How does this all end? You know, how does all this massive fighting everywhere? How does it all end? So hope you enjoyed, and I'll see y'all next time.